Thanks so much for tuning into this session of Sweet Slides 101, where we focus on creating presentations that engage from beginning to end. I'm Bethany Auk, the founder and creative director of SlideRabbit, a presentation services boutique agency. You can follow us here or on LinkedIn to catch all upcoming sessions of this presentation-focused webinar series. Enjoy! Today's session is all about engagement. So we're going to walk through some immediately adoptable strategies for grabbing attention right away, using design to recapture wandering minds, and stepping up your delivery, even if you're a reluctant speaker. Did you know that we're down to about 8 seconds of attention span? That's the point when distractions just start to creep in. Even an engaged audience will start to tune out after about 10 minutes. So whether you're presenting to sell, persuade, or inform, you really can't be successful at any of these goals unless you can recapture your audience throughout your presentation. To do it, we need to think strategically about how we can make our content, our design, and our delivery work together to engage our audience throughout the presentation. Of course, engagement doesn't just get us attention, it's a primer for a lot more. Most people understand that the more engaged the audience is, the more of the content they're going to remember. But there are many other advantages to engaging an audience well. Audiences that feel engaged are more open-minded to new ideas and information, and also they're more action-oriented. Engaged participants feel higher levels of motivation and they display more creativity and problem solving. So if you're hoping to get buy-in or inspire change, keeping your audience engaged keeps them more ready to solve hard problems and more motivated to act. So to do all that, we'll learn today to start strong, gaining attention and alignment right away. We'll learn how to design our content to attract wandering minds and to recapture them when that inevitable distraction appears. Plus, we'll talk about how to infuse the session with life to keep eyes from glazing. Like everything, we'll start at the beginning. So recently I was working with a client who couldn't really figure out why their sales meetings felt so kind of blasé and lackluster. She started to dread them, which then started to compound the problem. And she would start timidly, right? Her narrative started off with an introduction to herself and giving a company history and overview. I bet some of you out there have already spotted a couple problems in her approach. And if so, please pop them in the chat. We'll be able to talk about all of those today, probably. She and I worked through her narrative and also her delivery. And so she was set up to start strong with a problem to success story. Her prospect then could connect with that story because they could see their own problems and pain points in it. And then that story would highlight her company software, of course, as the hero of the tale. So the first time she delivered it that way, she did email me a thank you right after. She said the session was livelier with the client asking more questions. So by starting with a story and creating a positive connection to the client's needs at the outset, the mood of her entire presentation switched from boring to interactive to productive. So there are a lot of lessons we can pick out from the previous story, but let's focus on storytelling. I'm sure you've heard a lot about incorporating stories into presentations. It's effective because that's the way our brains developed. Early oral histories were passed down to teach new generations how to process the things around them and stay safe in their world. A narrative shows us why we should care about something and includes some causal connections so that we know how or why those things happen. When we can ignite both sides of those pieces in our content, we increase our persuasive impact and we increase the memory retention in our audience. Because stories were so integral to survival and success in our past, they attract attention right at the beginning. Tell a story that your audience can relate to, and you'll see wandering eyes start to turn back your way. Audience members come to any presentation from a Just another word on positivity here. Audience members come to any presentation from a variety of situations. We can't control what a person's day has looked like, but we can try to set a positive note from the beginning. We'll talk more about using different stimuli to prime the audience today, but did you know that we can affect the way our audiences experience a presentation simply by including a smiling face at the outset? Positive imagery or information, including stories with positive outcomes, put the audience in the right frame of mind. It's probably implicitly obvious that people with a positive mindset are more open to challenge and change, but in fact, it's been studied, and a positive mindset can affect many qualities that we need to get buy-in and to maintain good engagement. Among them are a reduced fear of failure, increased problem-solving skills, team orientation, and an ability to refocus after an attention lapse. So if we add the emotional benefits of positive stories, we're creating very strong openings and priming our audience to be open to our suggested changes and ready to take on some problem-solving challenges. Strong beginnings can set the mode for a successful presentation, but given the modern world with its plethora of distraction, we need to recapture that attention regularly throughout the presentation. While today I will focus on how to make content more engaging, if you're interested in more background reading on why today's recommendations works, I cannot recommend the work of Carmen Simon enough. Many of today's recommendations are born out of the content in her latest book, Made You Look, and also her previous book, Impossible to Ignore. Carmen is a cognitive neuroscience, and she focuses a lot of her work on business content delivered in a presentation format and how we pay attention to that and what we pay attention to more when ideas are presented visually. For those of you interested, she will be presenting at the Presentation Summit in just a few weeks. One of Carmen's recommendations, which is too often forgotten in business presentations and narratives, is why and how all of the information hangs together. Profluence is like a sense of flow. It's the sense that this is all building to something. Disjointed presentations where we're sharing stats and factoids and trends run the risk of overloading the audience with too much disparate information. So when you begin to write a presentation, take some time to think about profluence and plan for it from the start. Let's back up and discuss why profluence is helpful. So the working memory is where we process new information, where we're actively learning and making connections. The thing is, it has a cognitive load, which means that the working memory has a limited capacity and a limited duration. Typically, it's accepted that the working memory can hold and process about 7 disconnected ideas at a time. If within a presentation, the segments, exercises, stories, and other content feel disjointed, all of these inputs can start to kind of jangle in the working memory of the audience members. As the audience brains work to find the connections or relate information in order to process it, they're unable to intake new information and they may become distracted or overwhelmed. To avoid this, plan for profluence in and among the content in any presentation. In other words, story doesn't have to end at the positive anecdote that you start with. Use connecting words and phrases between sections and frequently relate them back to the theme. That way we can help our audience tie major ideas together and relieve some of that cognitive load. So here are some of the types of transitions you can help to create some of that structure between ideas. Temporal. Now that we understand X, we can look at what comes next. Additive means linking ideas together as interrelated, and that can help kind of clarify each one. Adversative ideas can become clearer through contrast. Sometimes an opposing idea or stat helps to solidify our point. And of course, causative. Cause and effect are important and powerful frameworks for memory, which we just learned in our discussion of narrative. By keeping these transitions and connections in mind, we help the audience stay engaged from beginning to end by creating a smooth progression of ideas through the presentation. Here's a sample presentation that we will improve today. If anything jumps out about you about ways to improve this presentation right away, please go ahead and pop it in the chat. We will be coming back to this for further improvements throughout the sections. For now, I do want to talk about one strategy for profluence planning. Use your slide sorter board as a storyboard. You can make sure that you are including some of those transitions that we just discussed. This way we can help map where the links are in our story and hold ourselves accountable to sharing those links with the audience. Creating a sense of flow, and especially one of building to something, orients the audience and relieves the pressure on cognitive load. We'll talk about capping off profluence in just a bit. Here's our sample presentation again. What else stands out to you about this? Anyone? If you were working with this presentation, what might you want to change about it? Cora suggests that we need some graphics. Less wordy from Bill. We'd add some images, says Leslie. Yes, it's very monotonous, right? We're looking at a lot of blue and white text, white slides, everything, even though we've got some different layouts at play, everything looks very similar. When slides look the same or too similar, this has a sort of habituation effect on the audience. When they feel there's nothing new to look at, they're more likely to allow their minds to wander. So this brings us to variety. Looking at new and varied input gives our brains little dopamine hits. It's probably why that doom scroll is so addictive. Evolutionarily, our brains are pattern-finding machines, because breaks in patterns could indicate danger or opportunity. So, for instance, birdsong is like constant and calming, but when the birds fall silent, our brains perk up. We can use this natural response to pattern disruption to keep the attention of the audience. So make sure your presentations don't look like this. Instead, we can recapture those wandering minds with variety by making sure our presentations cycle through different elements. Things like different layouts, bold color choices, content type, and even movement via animation or morph transitions. When we include a pattern disruptor, we reattract those wandering minds back to us, back to our presentation and our content. There's also a second way to use variety to our advantage. Beyond keeping attention, variety can also be used to prime our audience to be in an attentive state before we share crucial information. So we could use a bold statement slide or something with a big pattern disruptor to attract attention just before more important or denser information in order for that content to have more impact with our audience. These pattern disruptors make the audience sit up and pay attention, so we're priming them to pay attention to something important, even if it's less exciting to look at. Variety, again, it can mean many things, right? New layouts, different and bolder color choices, interesting visuals, or even unexpected imagery. Our brains are constantly trying to anticipate what comes next, and when it becomes easy, we can relax and zone out. By changing the visual input in novel ways, we can turn heads and minds back into our direction. We often hear that we need to say things 3 times in order for someone to really hear it. That adage is often put to use in the kind of like, tell them what you're going to say, then tell them what you told them approach. Unfortunately, this recent indicators tell us that 3 times is just not enough to really inspire action. Now, the thinking is that a person must hear a message 7 to 14 times in order to take action. That means that we need to add repetition of our main theme into our presentation. Here's our mock presentation again from earlier, now with our variety added. The variety is great, right? But we also need to remain grounded in our main idea. If we want to drive home our message, we need to thread an idea throughout our presentation. These orange indicators aren't to suggest that we need a large, bold statement slide every time we repeat the idea, but rather that we're identifying where the main message will reappear in the content or the talk track throughout the narrative. Never let the session or presentation stray too far from the main message without a chance to return. If you're interested in more kind of how to build in repetition and refrains, Glenn Gibson writes a book called Before the Mic, which is a wonderful book about kind of how to work in refrains in narratives for public speaking. Okay, I promised it earlier, so what about cognitive closure? We talked a little bit about profluence, and when we need to cap off our profluence, we really need to bring everything to a close. When it comes to remembering things well, we often need a conclusion. So here's our storyboard again from a section on profluence. Brains are always looking for that closure. Tying up all of the information with a bow helps people feel that they're ready to take action. So zip it all together. Always close your presentation and sessions with decisive takeaways, next steps from the critical concepts and data that you shared. Okay, so we've covered how to start strong in your narrative and how to affect your design so that you're recapturing minds all the time. But what happens when you get to the actual presentation? How can we infuse that experience? How can we infuse in that experience a dynamic feel that keeps everyone's attention? You don't have to be a professional motivational speaker to keep an audience. In this section, I want to cover some important reminders for the everyday presenter. So many people find themselves a little frozen in place when it comes to public speaking. It's, of course, like the number one or number two phobia that people have. But with a few core skills, you can feel more authentic and also more relatable in front of a crowd. These all go kind of doubly for presenting remotely, where we have the added challenge of kind of bridging that connection gap across virtual space. So first, make sure to avoid monotone speaking and use more voice modulation than you might usually. Animated delivery holds attention and makes you look more comfortable right away. Gesture and emote, right? Moving through space and moving your face. Reading body language and facial expressions are a big part of nonverbal communication and connection. Excitement's contagious. So if you can find some places in your presentation to bring in emotion, that will be attention getting for your audience, and you'll be able to recapture people at those crucial spots. Ask questions. Whether you're asking people to respond in chat or via a poll, or even if you're just asking rhetorical questions, questions automatically get our brains working. And when people hear a question, if they're a little zoned out, they immediately focus back in, the brain immediately starts working on solutions. So ask questions periodically throughout the presentation to reactivate those brains. Use names when you can, right? Nothing catches our attention like our own names. Using names frequently while interacting with, so if you can, use names frequently while interacting with the group. It will also help build on the sense of team and validate those that are interacting. So none of this is about being kind of cartoonish, but rather just being authentic, just with a little extra. Speaking coach Sally Zimney is one of my favorites, and she likes to say, be about 110% you. So don't, create a character up there, but get up and just be a little bit more effusive and emotive than you might typically be in a day-to-day conversation. I'm sure you've sat through presentations where the clock seems to slow way down. And in these instances, the temptation to find distraction is really high. So we can also use the pace of the presentation and the visuals to keep those audience minds from wandering. I saw earlier, Bill mentioned splitting some slides to multiple slides when there's a lot of content. And that's a great strategy that we'll talk about right now. So earlier we talked about avoiding overload of the working memory by kind of respecting cognitive load. But conversely, not enough inputs can underwhelm the cognitive load, which can also cause people to allow for distraction and disconnection. So the pace of changing information is very important in keeping attention. When speaking, studies indicate that visual input should change every 30 seconds to 2 minutes. In this presentation, I'll have used about 58 slides by the end, which is a frequency of about 1 slide every 30 seconds, with a few additional animations kind of sprinkled in. This way, the audience feels that distraction may cause them to miss something important. More slides doesn't have to mean more content or ideas. There are many slides that could be easily broken down into bite-sized pieces or animated. Simple animation is a great way to keep the visual inputs progressing. For instance, a slide like this could build, adding the next point only when the speaker is done with the previous point. Not only does this keep the inputs coming, it also heads off another presentation pitfall. You've probably heard that audiences will often read ahead on a slide, which can distract them from the presenter. So by adding the simple animation, you're keeping the control of where the audience's attention is staying. Here's another good example of a slide that may sit on the screen for quite a while. There's a lot for the presenter to cover here. There's also not a lot of visual interest, so the longer it's on the screen, the more the eyes are going to wander. Instead, we could think about this as the main hero and the 3 sections of detail about it. By breaking them out, we can change the slide input more often, and we can use higher impact design. So here's that slide now broken to 4. When we use more slides, each can contain less content. This means that the audience can't read ahead and will focus on the presenter. Then we can carry the approach through the 3 detail slides. Promoting each idea to its own slide increases its perceived importance, meaning the audience is more likely to process and remember each piece of content. And by using bolder colors, it's more clear that the slide content is changing, even to wandering eyes and minds. In this series, we just went from 1 slide to 4 without any new content. In this way, we can change the slide more often, and the content can have a higher impact on the audience. We've all probably been in a presentation where the presenter makes everyone stand up and stretch or do something silly. And it does help wake us up, but there's more than just the movement itself at work. The brain is not isolated when it comes to learning and reacting to inputs. The latest thinking in cognitive science is that the mind and body work together in an environment for effective learning. So by moving the body, we can get the brain moving. Wouldn't it be fun, right, if we only ever had to deliver content that lends itself to hands-on activities and small group games? Some of you may be lucky enough to have these opportunities, but for those delivering more buttoned-up content or in situations where these just won't fly, how can we put embodied cognition theories to use to create more engaging content? We can incorporate embodied cognition in several ways. By using movement in our visuals, as creators, we can activate the motor centers of the brain. GIFs or GIFs, whichever way you want to play that one, animation, short videos, or even images of people in motion awaken those parts of our brain. Stories, again, make sure to include sensory details or physical activities in person-centered stories. Studies show that audiences retain more when they watch a presenter draw a concept on a whiteboard, and that incorporating meaningful gestures and movement around the space into delivery keeps the audience engaged. In fact, even indicating size or direction with your hands or body can activate the brains in the audience. Again, not all content and situations lend to hand-on activities, but something as simple as writing notes can increase cognition and memory retention. So encourage your audience to take notes, maybe by providing handouts or worksheets. Another simple approach could even be asking the audience to sketch out ideas or solutions. This mind-body tie has shown to increase memory retention and mental engagement with the presentation content. Of course, we don't always have time to tie in frivolous games that don't lend themselves to the goals of your presentation, but I'd be remiss not to mention a few ideas for bringing a little fun and competition. If you can hear my dog, I apologize. He really wanted to be in here with me, and he's outside, but he's really still making himself known. Okay, so most are familiar with live and virtual polling tools, but what about working in trivia as you go? Trivia creates the need for questions, which of course we know recapture wandering minds. Nothing grabs attention and invigorates engagement like competition. So if we can assign points to those who get right answers, or for other participatory behaviors like volunteering to be the scribe, that will re-engage people and hold them accountable to participating and engaging in your content. Consider adding a timed element, right? That always increases the sense of urgency and it will wake up some sleepy brains. Even you could create teams and drive home final takeaways with a quick game show activity. So we'll have a second for question and answers shortly. So pop those into the question and answer panel if you haven't already. Remember, I may have missed them in chat, but first let's review what did we learn today. Start strong with a positive story that primes with positivity. Don't just toss information at the audience. Help them understand how and why it's all connected. Use design to recapture wandering minds by infusing unexpected elements. And keep things lively with regularly changing slides and maybe even a game or two. Our next session is scheduled for January. Audrey will place that link in the chat for registration. This time, we're going to turn our focus to the art of pitching. So whether you're pitching for new business or for investment, we're going to cover pitch narratives, optimal content, and design strategies that win. So join us in the new year. If you want to keep up with us and upcoming webinars and offers, you'll find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. We also have a quarterly newsletter. You'll be directed to these live links right after the webinar survey. Audrey, did we have any questions come in through the question and answer panel?
I do have one that someone DM'd me directly. It is, how should slide count and pace differ in virtual presentations?
Yes. So in the 2-minute to 30-second kind of range that's like recommended, I would go on the more frequent side for virtual presentations. Their virtual audiences are dealing with a lot of different distractions, and you can't control how big your screen is on their screen. They may have an inbox up, Slack or Teams, whatever. So make sure that that content is changing more frequently so that they feel that they really can't look away. Conversely, I should mention, we should be speaking more slowly in virtual presentations. People, again, dealing with a lot of things. So we need to speak more slowly and repeat more when we're presenting virtually, which can be hard when you're changing the slide more often. Great. So thanks everyone so much for coming today. If we didn't get to your question or you have another one, you can always reach out to us at hello@sliderabbit.com. The ideal length of a presentation of number slides to make it effective. Oh my gosh, Cora, that depends. So that could depend on your audience, what your content is, what your environment is. I would say I do like to present at about 2 slides per minute. So it does, I think, would heavily depend on your time, the time that you're allotted. So those things can all change. If you've got some really deep intellectual content or you're doing a lot of exercises, you won't want to change the slide as much as the exercise becomes kind of the focus. So there's a lot to that question. I wish there was a hard and fast rule, but I think about pace for when you're actually doing speaking sections and work to that to 30-second slide change. Great. So I hope to see everyone here in a few months for perfecting your pitch, but please reach out in the meantime if we can be of any help. Thanks so much.